Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're going to explore a really fascinating psychological concept that secretly dictates almost every single choice you make. We're talking about something called meta-programs. You can think of these as the invisible operating system running quietly in the background of your mind. They basically form the framework for how you perceive the entire world and, crucially, where you find your motivation. So let's dive right into this and see how unlocking these hidden patterns can completely change your trajectory.
We've all been there, right? It's January 1st, or maybe a Monday morning, and you draw that firm line in the sand. You tell yourself, that's it, no more junk food, or I am never skipping a workout again. But why do these well-intentioned goals, these strict diets and New Year's resolutions, almost always crash and burn within just a few weeks? It is incredibly frustrating. The problem is, we constantly rely on the stick approach to force ourselves into compliance. We're constantly pushing ourselves away from failure rather than actually pulling ourselves towards success. And that brings us to Section 1, the motivation paradox.
See, the way we naturally frame our deepest desires is often fundamentally flawed, and it sets us up for a cycle of temporary success followed by an almost inevitable relapse. To really picture this, let's look at a story from the Beck Institute for Cognitive Behavior Therapy. A wellness coach shared this experience about a client named Amy. Amy came into her session and basically just sighed and said, "I have to stop nighttime snacking." She had been trying to beat this habit for years, and because she kept failing, she developed this massive sense of hopelessness. She felt completely stuck. But here's the crazy part. Amy's problem wasn't a lack of willpower at all. Her problem was the actual language and framing she was using to motivate herself.
So how do we fix what Amy was doing? Let's get into Section 2, Approach versus Avoidance Explained.
According to neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP, there are basically two primary types of motivation battling it out in our minds. First, we have approach motivation. This is all about moving toward a desired outcome. It's about striving for goals, embracing a challenge, and really focusing on the benefits you're going to get. On the flip side, we have avoidance motivation. You might also hear this called away from motivation. This revolves entirely around steering clear of negative outcomes. It's driven by not wanting something, like forcing yourself to exercise just to avoid gaining weight or to avoid feeling guilty.
The data behind this is absolutely mind-blowing. In a huge, randomized controlled trial by Martin Oscarson and his team, researchers actually tracked over 1,000 people and their New Year's resolutions for a full year, and the findings were crystal clear. People who framed their goals using approach-oriented language were 26% more successful over the course of the year than the people using avoidance goals.
And this example brilliantly illustrates exactly why that 26% gap exists. Think about the goal to stop eating junk. That's a classic avoidance goal. It requires this exhausting, constant state of vigilance. You have to actively try to not do something, which creates a ton of pressure and shame if you slip up even a little bit. But a goal like exercise 3 times a week, that's an approach goal. It gives you a concrete, positive action to actually go out and execute. It helps you build forward momentum rather than just constantly playing defense against your own bad habits.
Actually, let's slow down for just a second. What is physically happening inside your body when you do this? Well, when you use approach motivation, focusing on what you actually want to achieve, your brain rewards you with dopamine. That's the neurotransmitter associated with pleasure and drive. It creates a state of growth and potential. Avoidance motivation, however, is heavily linked to your body's fight or flight response. It runs entirely on the energy of stress and protection. Sure, you might get a quick burst of adrenaline to escape a bad situation, but living in that state, it's exhausting and literally unsustainable for the long haul.
Moving right along to Section 3, Identity, Agency, and Luck.
You know, these motivation styles don't just change your daily habits, they actually dictate your identity, your sense of personal agency, and honestly, even how lucky you feel in life. Think about it. If your goal is to not be depressed, you're using an avoidance strategy. The only way to measure if you're succeeding is to constantly look back and ask, well, how depressed am I compared to yesterday? Your entire point of reference is still tethered to the negative emotion. But if your goal is the attainment of happiness, a pure approach strategy, you're entirely focused forward. You measure the presence of joy. You leave the negative state behind entirely because your focus has completely shifted to the positive horizon.
And this perfectly explains the notorious yo-yo dieting trap. Imagine a dieter heavily driven by away from motivation. Let's say they weigh 18 stones, and they desperately want to avoid being overweight. So they diet hard, they suffer through it, and they finally drop below that weight. But the very second they escape that dreaded number on the scale, their motivation completely dries up. The threat is gone. So they relax, the weight creeps right back up, the threat returns, and the whole miserable cycle repeats itself. Their motivation literally requires the presence of a negative threat to even function.
This ties deeply into what psychologists call your locus of control. People who heavily rely on avoidance often develop an external locus of control, meaning they feel like life just happens to them, and they end up blaming fate or chance when things go wrong. But towards people, the ones using approach motivation, they develop an internal locus. They take responsibility, they build an identity around success. Over time, following through on approach goals like going to the gym regularly shifts your identity from someone who is just avoiding getting out of shape to someone who simply is an athlete. That sense of internal agency makes them feel far more positive and, quite frankly, a lot luckier in life. Okay, let's talk about how this plays out at work. Section 4, the right business roles. So, are we saying you need to switch 100% of your life towards motivation? Not exactly. Neither meta program is inherently bad. They're just highly context-dependent, and they belong in very different professional environments. Extreme towards people are amazing visionaries, entrepreneurs, and creatives. They see the goal and they charge right at it. But they can sometimes completely overlook massive pitfalls. Think of those blind stock market booms. On the other hand, away from people are absolutely vital for roles like health and safety, quality assurance, pharmacy, and maintenance engineering. They naturally spot what could go wrong and they fix crises before they ever happen. I mean, you absolutely want an away from person inspecting your airplane before takeoff, for sure. The cool thing is, you can actually spot these patterns in your colleagues right now. Just listen to the language they use. Towards individuals are always going to talk about what they can achieve, the benefits, and what they can get out of a deal. Their body language will usually feature inclusive, nodding gestures. But your away from colleagues? They'll use words like avoid, prevent, eliminate. Or they'll frequently chime in with, yes, but hang on a minute. Their body language might feature more dismissive or warding off gestures. Knowing this is a real game changer because it helps you communicate and influence them so much more effectively. All right, let's wrap this up with Section 5, reframing your future.
Now that we actually understand the mechanics of these invisible programs, it's time to literally rewire how you set your targets. Let's reframe a struggle I think we all share. I really need to spend less time on my phone. That is a classic away from avoidance goal. It's restrictive and it keeps your brain entirely focused on the negative behavior. Let's flip that to an approach goal. I will read for 20 minutes before bed each night. Do you feel the difference there? We replaced a restriction with a generative, positive action. You are adding to your life, not subtracting from it.
A fantastic framework to make sure you're doing this correctly every time is the SPORT method. Your goals should be specific, positive, observable, realistic, and time-bound. But the absolute anchor of this entire method is the P, positive. Your goals must be stated in the positive. They have to be about what you actually want, not what you are desperately trying to escape. Like our sources remind us, lasting life change is about where you want to go, not about where you've been.
So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Take a hard look at the major goals in your life right now. Are you operating from a place of fear, just trying to avoid a negative outcome? Or are you operating from a place of abundance, moving towards something you genuinely, deeply desire? Consciously choosing to shift your locus of control from away from to towards might honestly be the most powerful change you ever make. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.